I don't think most Pilates teachers are prepared to teach the client a lot of the equipment adjustments and how they affect the load on the body. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. How does the equipment apply load? We are given usually a table or one spring setting for every exercise. We're taught the choreography. We get pictures of it on one particular body. And then it's like, okay, go. If you are going to primarily teach reformer group classes at a beginner or intermediate level, how do you change the training so that you're delivering the most important things and relevant things in a reasonable time frame?
Welcome to the Shape of Thought podcast. I am your host, Ms. Sony Lanza. On today's episode, we dive into the fascinating world of engineering and Pilates movement with Kaleen Canevari. Kaleen is a unique blend of mechanical engineer and Pilates instructor, bringing over a decade of experience in the intersections of these fields. She began her journey at Balanced Body as a design engineer in 2013, where her curiosity led to take Pilates classes to better understand the equipment she was designing. By 2014, she was not only building but also teaching Pilates. Kaleen's entrepreneurial spirit shone through as she ran a nationwide Pilates equipment maintenance business and later founded Flexia, the first technology-connected Pilates reformer, which she successfully sold in 2025. Today, she continues to innovate by creating physics and biomechanics content for Pilates instructors at pilatesphysics.com. In our conversation, we delve into the fascinating role of physics and Pilates, discussing how understanding biomechanics can enhance both teaching and practice. Kaleen shares her insights on the need to evolve the Pilates education to keep up with the pace of the industry's ever-changing landscape. We also talk about the importance of staying curious as an instructor and how this mindset can lead to the continuous growth and innovation. Join us as we uncover the why behind Pilates exercises and equipment and learn from Kaleen's inspiring journey and forward-thinking approach. Kaleen, thank you so much for taking the time to be here for the Shape of Thought podcast. I'm so excited to dive into this conversation. I know we're going to have a lot of things to talk about. Just to get started here, you have been posting so much great information lately on Instagram about some things that the Pilates industry is overlooking, or like the Pilates trainings are not focusing on enough or could focus on enough. You just made a post about this, about some things that you would like to see more in teacher training.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I love these kind of conversations and I'm excited about talking about nerdy stuff in Pilates. And I think Pilates teacher training hasn't evolved with the industry. I did teacher training through Balanced Body 12 years ago, and it was good. I've seen, like most people who've been in the industry for a while, that's the starting point. It's not the ending point when you do your comprehensive training, right? But is that exact training what is needed today or what should be standard today? Well, I think there are a lot of factors. It really depends on what you want to do with your training and so on and so forth. And one of the core tenets I think about when I approach any of the conversations in Pilates is, do we know better and can we do better now? Like, it's okay to evolve, right? Joe Pilates, know more than we did when he was alive. Can we apply it? Anyway, back to the teacher training concept. I think there are a couple things, and group classes are so prevalent now. And we aren't necessarily, the program I went through 12 years ago was preparing me to teach a private session, really. And leading a group class is very, very different than teaching a private class. And it's a different skill. And it's less about correcting every little nuance in your client and more about the environment and the flow. And personalization is important, yes, but you actually have to be okay with people not looking perfect. And that is really, that's hard, right? How do you make the judgment of whether to say something or to let it go? That's a skill that Pilates teachers develop over time, and most of us have had to do it on our own. But the other thing I think about a lot, which has kind of been the subject of my posts recently, is how does the equipment apply load? We are given usually a table or one spring setting for every exercise. We're taught the choreography. We get pictures of it on one particular body. And then it's like, okay, go. And then you go in the studio and someone says, either that hurts, I can't do that, I don't feel anything, or they're fine, but you're like, oh my gosh, that's not what I was intending. And this feedback loop of how do you notice what's happening or have a conversation with your client or clients, compare it to the intention, and then adjust. And a big part of that conversation is how is their body interacting with gravity and with the equipment? And we don't talk about that in teacher training. We don't talk about progressions or adapting to different body sizes or capabilities. And to me, that's a core part of applying the method for everybody, which is obviously our grand goal, and understanding what we're teaching. We are stewards of this amazing, amazing equipment. I mean, the equipment Joe invented was just it's just amazing.
It's ahead of its time. Yeah.
And I was just thinking like the other day I was like, equipment the modern society needs was invented 100 years ago. Like anyway, that's a different topic, but so my contribution, my lens, my ongoing investigation, because this is not something that I already know. Like everything I post is like I'm doing the analysis in real time. And a lot of times it's rooted in things that may have seemed obvious or I may have had in the back of my head, but really breaking things down like, does body weight affect the load in a step up front on the chair? And how much does it affect the load? I mean, yes, logically, I'm like, sure, like you have to lift your own body weight. But actually, the difference between someone who's 250 pounds, someone who's 140 pounds, the weight that they're moving is different by 110 pounds.
Yeah.
I've never, putting numbers on that just blows my mind that we're like, oh yeah, step up front, two blacks, middle peg for everybody.
I will say, like, that's kind of just from my own personal experience in my own body, because I am a larger body type. And Pilates is very, the standard setting where they have people start from, like where you learn from, is for a smaller body type. And things never felt good on me, or like they never able to do certain exercises. So, like you said, a lot of the things that you learn along the way as teachers is through personal experiences and nuances. But just how is like what you were, just to add on what you were saying earlier, is the landscape for Pilates has changed tremendously. And it's evolving at such a rate that they're now putting so many machines in a room. Like it's not just like we're thinking like classes of like, and like when I got started, like the max class was 6. Now it's 12. Some studios are like 20 and all of these things. And it's inevitable these things are going to unfold. But like you said, my curiosity is when we know this is where it's going and we know that there are so many variables to the equipment of what could happen to each individual person. I almost feel like we need to teach or like approach teaching clients almost like they're teachers so they can have their own accountability for their bodies. They know their spring tensions. They understand how to adjust for their body types and how to have etiquette for the machines. Because like you said in a class, you don't want to disrupt the flow. You can't make all these customizations. It's impossible in a class of that setting without interfering with the flow and the momentum of a class.
Yeah, that education piece that you mentioned, educating the client about their body and how it interacts with the equipment and how they might adjust the equipment. That's a big shift, I think, for Pilates teachers.
It takes us out of
How,
the guide.
well, yeah, that's something that I don't think was really talked about 10 years ago. I mean, maybe I'm sure there were some people talking about it, but that's a big shift in how you teach. I mean, even I teach small group classes now, and my teaching continues to evolve based on what I'm learning and how can I make the people in the room feel welcome. And as I start inserting things like, well, you know what, you're a taller person and you're a shorter person, so your footwork springs might be different. And I can see the client, they're looking at me like, what are you talking about? Like, of course, I've told them that springs get heavier as they stretched, but the math, like, this is an area where I don't think we have a lot of we haven't developed a lot of wisdom or guidelines yet for adapting Pilates for these large group settings, like you're saying. And part of the problem is that in order to do that, we have to let go of some of the control that we have or had in
Mm-hmm.
private. for better, for worse, and recognize that inherently group classes are kind of in the middle. You're gonna find a middle ground for most people. They're not gonna be the most personalized thing. And at some point, people might pick to be in the wrong class. And that's
Yeah.
not, you should change, your intermediate class if a beginner accidentally registered and now is overwhelmed or whatever, right? Like, so there's other structures that come into play when you're delivering a large group class that maybe the Pilates world hasn't, or Pilates teacher training hasn't prepared us for. And we're having to learn on the fly.
Well, I'm curious too with the amount with like teacher training, and they vary because I know there's a lot of great programs out there that go more in depth.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time, even from my personal experience from my teacher training, I'm very, very fortunate that I've had a long journey of Pilates before I even got into teacher training. But a lot of the times they give you the choreography, they teach you basic anatomy, like the very basics, the fundamentals, and some progressions, like if you meet someone who's pregnant or whatever, this is what to do. If something hurts, just stop. Like basic, like get people started so they can go out the door and start teaching. But I know as a teacher, and there's only so much that we can learn in one set of time because you don't want to overwhelm people. Also, what the brain has a capacity to be able to retain. You kind of almost wonder, like, knowing that the environment is so much different, would it be better to have chapters of like how to address a private clientele and then have a chapter of how to address a large class? Because like what you said, the landscape has changed so much that they're not even relative to each other anymore for what happens in a private session, what happens in a class session, especially when a lot of the class environments are so interchangeable as well. You're not getting, a lot of people don't have the luxury to like progress people together like when we started out teaching Pilates.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I don't have all the answers. Like, I
I
enjoyed
know
this
this is
conversation, but like,
exploration. Sometimes I get intense. I don't mean to. I'm realizing I need to be
it's
mindful
not
of
my
that.
thought at all.
Okay.
I think this is a preface for everybody listening that one of the things I'm curious about is how do you match, like, if you are going to primarily teach reformer group classes at a beginner or intermediate level, how do you change the training so that you're delivering the most important things and relevant things in a reasonable time frame? Because in my mind, time equals money and investment is a big deal. Are they going to do it full time, et cetera, et cetera? And one of those conversations I think is really interesting around this group reformer class is how much of the original repertoire do you need to teach them? Do they need to do Reformer 3 in order to be a competent and safe beginner and intermediate group reformer class teacher?
Yeah, that's a good
How
question.
often do I teach tendon stretch, snake, et cetera, et cetera? I'm not like, I don't know what my opinion is, but would that time, my question is, would that time be better served instead teaching more frameworks on how to adapt, progress, regress, manage a room of personalities and experiences instead of how do you teach someone snake?
That's what I've been guinea pigging with personally. I teach at a larger class or a class studio, and the owner is fantastic. I really appreciate that she lets me kind of go in and kind of experiment, and she's understanding of what the landscape is. Like, yeah, please, what's a safe way to guide people in these environments? It's like almost I'm curious if we have the patience and the confidence enough in what we're providing for people and what people get out of the knowledge. I started teaching people about the springs immediately, starting to show people, like, if you're this height, like with strap length, I have feelings about where the straps are sitting and how it's hitting different body types and what I've seen develop over time that I have questions, which we'll get into later. But what I've started doing was working with clients in a room in the beginner classes that they have to take. This is a class, this is how the springs evolve. If it's supporting you or if you want to have more instability, this is what they mean. It's like guiding them like teachers. And then how are all the planes related to each other in the exercises? Because a lot of the exercises are very similar if you know how to organize yourself in those different planes. And so when people start feeling that immediately in their body and they know the language as well, You can say less, let them dive in and feel it more. I've noticed the ones that I was able to like spend some time with, they progressed really quickly because they immediately knew, like they had the knowledge of what teachers get when they start going into the field of like, okay, I know where I'm at. And they understood that the first class is like, you're not going to get into the flow right away because we're learning the nitty gritty. But like once you get the nitty gritty, then we're going to have some fun. Then you're going to see why the progressions are happening. And I would love to, like, I'm still guinea pigging with this, but I'm curious if like studios adopted that kind of mindset of not having an expectation of like having to wow people. Because even if you wow them for a short time, they're just going to get burned out and go out to the next thing. But if you give them something to hold on to that for a lifetime that they can apply anywhere, now you have trust with somebody. And when you have trust with the teacher, then you have clients for life, you know?
Yeah. I agree with you, and I will add on to that and say that is
Please do.
very hard to do.
It
So what you're
is.
right, and that is, I think a lot of people given the choice would want to do that, and they don't know how. And I sympathize a lot with where the landscape is. I don't believe people want to do harm or be
No.
undertrained or anything like that. There's a crazy demand for Pilates. Teachers are hard to find. Training is expensive. So
Finding a good
here's
training.
the environment. Yeah, how do you know what a good training is? Therefore, we're in this situation we're in. So it's not, but to your point, there is an immense value in that establishing a foundation that you can grow from teacher to student and giving them tools. And I think personally, I think a lot of the modern Pilates is very driven by social media and aesthetics and attention span, right? There's this constant pressure to have a completely new workout every session. When I actually have, like, just last week, I teach 5 week sessions at the local Y on the reformer, and one of my long-term clients was like, can we do something today that we do the same thing again a couple times throughout the session so I can see if I'm getting better? Like, this is I hardly ever, I don't think I've ever had someone say, I want to do something different. I've only had people say, I want to do something the same so I can practice it and see if I'm getting better. And so that's directly at odds with this environment of, well, let's be creative, let's save this flow, let's make something different day over day over day over day. And that's really exhausting and hard. But it also, to your point, doesn't facilitate that foundation and trust and exploration phase necessarily.
Yeah, well, with teachers too, and I've started mentoring younger teachers, just trying to get their footing in the door and not get overwhelmed with just learning how to just find little details of like how you can guide someone when you're still on your journey of like, because we're always going to be on our journey with knowledge. It's like endless. You know, but it's the thing I think also with teachers, the younger teachers, they get so excited about what is possible to do on the equipment. And then also when you're younger, what you're capable of doing, and that excitement of self-exploration for yourself is like, oh my gosh, I love how I feel when I'm doing this. I love what this is really cool. And they are like itching to share it with everyone else. Like, you need to try this with me. But there's that little, I think there's that forgetfulness that we have a different perspective as teachers because we had to study the movement in a certain way. And so there's this innate intuition for a lot of us in our own bodies that is not always there in the client body unless they come from a movement background or an athletic background. Then usually they can pick that up. And there's like that fine line, I think, of like excitement, like, look what I can do, look how creative I can be, I love this part. And then forgetting that our job is to serve the person in front of us, and how do we support their lifestyle so they can do the things they love longer. And a lot of the time to support a client better, like you said, is a repetition of certain things, because there's always something new to discover in those like simple little exercises. It's like when the more they get integrated into it, they're like, oh, now I feel this. That's what that dumb cue was that I don't know what the world she was talking about, but I finally get it like 3 months later.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. I love that perspective too. I think it's so true. Like, the excitement of, I learned something and I want to share it with you, or I had this experience and I want to share it with you. And I think that's obviously, like, that's why I became a teacher. Pilates changed my life. I love the environment my teacher at the time was creating. I wanted to give that to other people. But I think, kind of circling back to what we mentioned at the beginning, what you mentioned at the beginning, it's very easy, and that's why I love Pilates physics. It's very easy to do an exercise and then apply your experience and try and get everyone else to have your experience without understanding how different body shapes, sizes, equipment settings change the experience. And this sort of trickles down. If you were taught something on a certain setting by someone who believed their setting was ideal, but you are two different size people, you're actually having two different experiences,
Right.
both believing that's the experience everyone should be having. And that's maybe the trap of all of this, is this belief that there's one ideal experience and that everybody's capable of having it and that you have had it, without acknowledging that there are goals and intents that we want, but the back and forth between the client and the teacher is often exploratory, experimental, a guide rather than a,
Dictator.
strict guru. Yes, there you go. There you go. So part of my numbers, right, applying numbers to these exercises, is to really drive home the fact that a lot of times we obsess about things that are, it's sub-optimization. We're obsessing over things that don't actually contribute in the way we think they do to the experience. And there's like a bulk of 80% of things that if you don't get right, it doesn't matter what the cherry on top looks like, because you have, I think I use this, it doesn't matter. We're all obsessed with the cherry on top. But if you don't know that you have no ice cream on your ice cream sundae, the
Still
cherry
just the
doesn't
cherry.
matter.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway.
Well, you're talking about, like you said, the experience for every client is different. And I know I sent you a question before this podcast. So I'll share my observations from when I was teaching people. So when I started with Pilates, the equipment that I was familiar with was the traditional studio reformer balanced body, the Cadillacs, and then some of the Gratz equipment. And the Gratz equipment, the width of the frames of the Cadillacs are a lot more narrow than the balanced body. And I know balanced body did that to accommodate larger body types. Then you also have the riser difference. The pulley system for the classical equipment is so much lower. And then you have the risers that are a little higher. I'm excited to explore more into the conversation about the risers because I asked you about that too. I was noticing with clients, and my question was kind of confused with my understanding with where the classical equipment started with. The straps are a little bit longer, and granted, you said like the carriage, how the wheels are, how it moves, there's a little bit more of a drag, so you have to work into it. But you have to reach into the straps to start the resistance. So with that reach, that oppositional reach, your body is having to organize itself better, or like, I don't want to say better, but it's having to organize itself. You have that whole, when you're reaching into something, everything has to kind of set into place rather than just start and go. And
You're talking you're talking like supine arms and straps.
Yeah, let's talk about let's talk about supine arms and straps. Let me put an exercise. Thank you for getting more detailed. So in comparison, not even going into the vector part, in comparison, what I was noticing with what I've always set my straps a little bit longer on the balanced body equipment because I wanted to give people the space to organize before they go into it, and I wanted to take away the instinct of wanting to rush into an exercise. I didn't want any cheating, like the instantaneous work. So with the straps, how they have them, you have a short loop that starts behind the shoulder block. The long loop is set on the shoulder block. Now with the risers a little bit higher, that's that direct access there. And then now with the towers on let's say the Allegro 2s, they're a little wider. So what I'm noticing with what's happening, especially for smaller body frames, is when their hands are in the straps, the load is instantaneous. There's no gradual load curve. So if someone does not know how to organize themselves or to stabilize the joint axis, when they go into the straps, you have that, it's already wider, especially for more petite frames, that joint interiorly rotates when they just move into it, which causes a lot of torque on the joint. And my curiosity was, why did we change the lever? Because when it's lower, when the straps are pulling at you, it's setting the joint more direct in the axis. Why did we make it higher? Why did we make it so wide and then shorter? That was my curiosity only with supine or facing foot bar with arms and straps. I have my own thoughts at the foot straps. That's another day.
I mean, there's so much to dig into, Miss Oni, and that's such a great question.
I understand it. I'm a
Not
pain in
what
the
I was
ass.
going
I'm
for
so
at all.
sorry.
No, I think this is a great question to dive into because, and I'll maybe frustrate people and frustrate you. I have a framework for trying to get the experience you want to get. There's not a right or a wrong answer, but I think there is a right or a wrong way to approach what you choose. So when you're teaching something, you need to know the intent, you need to know the load, and then you need to know the feedback from the client, whether it's verbal or just visual. And the intent matters. You're describing, you want the intent, the ability for someone to organize their body prior to experiencing load when their arms are straight up.
Well, they're clearly going to be in some kind of load, but just when it's behind them, they have to pull it forward to initiate.
Mm-hmm.
It's just immediately in it. Yeah.
In your it depends on why you want them to organize, like, and why we're doing Pilates. I could say my goal is that my clients build strength in a big range of motion, and therefore I want them to practice loaded movements in big ranges. And I know that springs get heavier as they stretch. So that first couple of inches of load of movement on the carriage, think about it. And if I am, then maybe they should be moving less spring weight because that's my intention for the exercise. And your intention could be different. And coming back to why risers evolved, I had no idea what the answer to this question was. So I did some digging. I'm not a great historian. I like figuring things out, not remembering things. So I found a great article by Kevin Bowen who talked about the evolution of the reformer in many ways, which I've gotten way more interested in that line of history, incidentally, recently. But he described the risers as an evolution for people like Eve Gentry and Kathy Grant, who were working with different body types, maybe in more rehab settings where they needed adjustability between different clients that were coming into their studios. And so part of this conversation is, in a group class, we generally have the same rope. Like, we make a lot of decisions in a group class because it's easier for the flow and it's good enough. Mm-hmm. We have to acknowledge that. And then the adjustability is available if you want to change either your whole group or you want to more personalize that experience in a small group or a private. So the intention is really important, and that's going to determine your equipment settings, which is springs and things like rope length or foot bar height, or whether you like risers high or low. The second thing is, do you mean torque as a negative thing?
Right. Well, for what is going on with that situation, because what I was noticing, there's a lot of petite people on the reformer. Mm-hmm. And the width of what those towers are and how short those straps are. For someone that's so petite and does not have the interoceptive awareness on how to put themselves together to go into that load to support themselves, I was noticing a lot of rotator cuff injuries, bicep tendon injuries because of that anterior rotation to try to compensate the movement. Because even sometimes you can lessen the spring, but if you don't know how to set yourself up, load is still load. Still pressing into something can still cause, torque. It just depends on what's going on with that joint axis too. That's where things get a little complicated, because it all matters. There's like all those little details make so many different differentiations of what the exercise is going to feel like. And so that's what my thing was. It's when you're teaching people how to move with the load and not cause harm on themselves. My rule of thumb is like, learn that interoceptive part of your body of like how you can control yourself before adding on. That's just my perspective.
Yeah,
That's my
yeah.
perspective before applying more and more load, because you can start also the neural pathways, what's going on with your brain of creating different habits. You can start instilling different things, and it can interfere and get a little muddy with what the body is trying to understand on how to move, because now you've applied too much, or they're fighting against so much different variables that they can't, it's harder for them to really gauge what to collect out of the exercise. My language isn't very great, but I hope that was clear.
Yeah, I there could arguably happen or either traumatic or because the body was not prepared for the load or the volume it was undergoing. And strength training is preparing the body for that load. And so far, there's very little evidence in research to correlate mechanics, form, with injury. Now, I'm not saying that to discredit what we teach in the Pilates studio, just to acknowledge that generally we want people to get stronger. And if we're trying to give them a way to move, then that's important. And your point about the nervous system, I mean, the first 6 weeks of any strength training is almost all neural adaptation. It's not mechanical, it's electrical. And so that is important. That's part of your intent. I don't get hung up inches in Pilates. My intent is going to be slightly different than yours. And the reason for that is that there is no studied optimal way or angle within a couple degrees that you should do certain exercises. And Joe Pilates most certainly had his, however many reformers he had in his studio, and had different sizes of people come in. And when we obsess about small inches on the reformer, we're missing the point that people vary in size by more than inches. This is the sub-optimization thing. Joe's experience on the reformer would be different than someone who has different limb length, even if they were the same height, or someone who has different body weight, or someone who's taller. We inherently know the procedures, but all that information is supposed to do is to say, what is optimal? It comes back to that, like, centering ourselves as the ideal, our experience that I was able to find optimal. If I'm centering, if I notice that I find best organization with my arms straight out in front of me, but now because the person is smaller and the pulleys are wider, they have to slightly widen their arms, their organization might be a little bit different than mine. And if they're struggling, then it's easy to make the conclusion that, well, if they had their arms straight up, they'd be able to organize better, because that was my experience. And you may, I don't want to take away, like, you are seeing a lot of clients, you are noticing a lot of things. Those are valid. Like, the scientific method starts with observation. It goes to asking questions and testing them. Like, this is a thing. This is not an avenue we should ignore. But in order to obsess about inches on the reformer, we have to acknowledge that the people on the reformer are varying different sizes with different limb lengths. And really, there's only a couple of exercises I can think of where the strap length is actually going to be the same no matter what your height is. And even if it's the same strap height, the angle of pull might be different because your arms might be longer or shorter. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not sure I'm comfortable getting too into inches of difference. And part of this reason, this sub-optimization thing, also stems from giving Joe a platform that his reformers were very intentionally designed, that he would design them the exact same way if he was alive today. And so I don't think that's true. And so it comes back to your intention. If your intention is you want their arms in a certain position, can you adjust the reformer to make that happen? And I think that's a completely valid thing to want. But whether that makes a difference and whether that's what we should intend to do, I think that's, everybody's going to have different opinions on that. And I'm not sure there's a right or wrong factual answer. I think
Oh, I don't
it's
think anything's factual.
right.
The
Yeah.
funny thing about the body is, like you were saying earlier, every experience is so different. Everyone's going to feel something different based on their life history, their body types, what their movement history is, like all of these things. There's just so much
Yeah.
gray matter that comes into play. My whole exploration thing as a teacher is I'm a firm believer of the whole body has to work as a system. Everything has to be integrated and collecting to get the task done. And so when I look at straps or like having just, and this is just, that's just one thing,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but also to just the curiosity of where that my language, I'm still working on my language with this. This is
Are we all?
one of my many weaknesses, where that force is going through or that torque is going through. And just noticing how I think it's also too, like you were saying, with like as teachers, how we're setting people up in large class settings because we're just putting people through the exercises, which is great too. But if you don't know where you're coming from, you know, there's more vulnerabilities. And I've been noticing the vulnerabilities of when the straps are a little bit shorter and people are having to pull forward and not learning the etiquette of things. And that was my
Yeah.
question of like, why was the choice shorter? And I can understand like when you're saying trying to build strength, you want to, but you
Well,
know, that's a different
shorter.
intention, like you said. Yeah, like that's,
Yeah.
and like for more, for teachers who are, or for clients that are more experienced, I don't think I would be as asking so many questions in my head. Like when I'm
Yeah, yeah,
watching
yeah.
people, I just watch the line of people moving. They're coming back and giving me feedback.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Well, there's two things that come to mind here. The first one is Joe Pilates, that basically says, I created the equipment because I was applying force to my clients I saw fit, and it was hard for me. I'm paraphrasing here.
mm-hmm,
So that now the equipment is applying force instead of me applying force.
mm-hmm,
So you can see it's very much like my takeaway from that is very much that he had an energy exchange and intuition about how he was applying force. I mean, that's a very different experience feeling someone move against you than watching them move against a fixed thing, right? So to your
mm-hmm,
point about your teaching intention, I think that is the equipment and what you want you're asking of your clients. There's room for a lot of variation here. And the second part is I think we give a lot of credit to things that are in hindsight that just sort of maybe came to be. So strap length, I think a far more practical reason for the straps being short is the fact that it's easy to set the same length on everyone using this method.
that's what I was
Yeah,
coming to. Yeah. Or what,
and
when I was digging. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'll give it. I love this. I did a little digging about material availability during Joe's time when he was
Mm,
inventing the reformer, for example. Why are we so hung up on the casters versus the ball bearings, the springs versus the weights, the straps versus the ropes? And really, the three things when we think about springs, his first patent was actually with weights on the reformer, not with springs.
interesting.
I built a one with
I
weights,
saw that.
which I've been having a lot of fun exploring, and I can see why. It's totally impractical. Like springs so practical. But also springs were like in vogue at the time. There was this thing called the chest expander that
Mm,
bodybuilders were promoting for people to work out at home, and those were springs. You could easily manufacture springs down the street. And you didn't have to haul 100 pounds of lead weights up the stairs, you know? So, very practical choice, aside from the fact that, oh, he chose springs because they work like muscles and lengthen and whatever. Like, I think if he did, he would have documented that because he documented everything. Side note. Second part, leather straps. Leather, super available. Nylon ropes did not exist at the time. Natural fiber ropes were very prevalent, especially in gym settings. but they had awful texture, they frayed, they stretched and contracted with weather. Joe was working in a precise environment, and so leather straps were like the only choice. And casters were also very readily available. Ball bearings were only they were there, but they were reserved for military manufacturing. They were high precision manufactured things. So Joe didn't really have the option to make his reformer move smoother because it would have been not available because we were in the war or prohibitively expensive. And that's not to take away from the thought process or the genius of what it's a practical thing that inventors go through. You know, in Kevin Bowen's article, he talks about how you knew you were on a Joseph Pilates machine if the handles were made from toilet paper rolls. Like this is a practical dude,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So we come back to the argument of like, what do you want to teach? Where is your level? And having the same rope settings, if that's the thing that makes your group class go easier, I wouldn't stress about it. But if you have a specific intent that you teach, right, it has to match what you're teaching. If someone wasn't as thoughtful about what they wanted to teach as you were, I wouldn't tell them to change the ropes. But if you were asking me what the right rope length was for what you were teaching, I would say, well, change the ropes because you
Well,
have a specific way
yeah.
that you are guiding someone in the movement experience.
I think the thing that I was looking at too is like and this is where things get complicated, and I don't mean to
Oh,
like
this.
okay okay, but it's like, again, the thing where I'm looking at with the straps on that is, again, just where the angle is coming from. So it's like it is a couple inches, but also when the pulley is a little higher, it's going to be more in the chest, right? It's going to be more in that part. That's what the most, or in the lats, are going to feel a bit of it. When it's lower, it's setting the joint in. And so it's like you have a little bit more, let's say supine. So that's kind of like where I was looking at, is like, where do these angles of these straps, based on these body types, where are they getting the initial sensation? Where is their body feeling it immediately? And how does that change for every body type? I'm just going to keep it at the hand straps. I'm not even going to go into the other. But that's just kind of like that's just where my brain was going. So it's not more of like, I'm just to be clear on that, I'm not really too hung up on like, oh, the straps must be a particular length. My point is, there's so much gray matter. Like you said, there's so many people that experience things differently. And with the traditional, like the studio reformers, the pulley system, you can adjust it for the heights. When you're working with something with like Allegros that are fixed, and there's more adaptations, in my opinion, that kind of need to be thought of. But the nice thing about the Allegros too, that I do appreciate, how easy they are to adjust, how easy you can set different things. But that goes back to my point of, would it be smarter to spend a little more time with clients to wean them into the Pilates equipment land, teaching them the settings for their appropriate body types in certain planes, even though it's a bigger investment of time and trust and all these things. But I know you were going to go somewhere, because I saw your gears turning with like diving into more things. And please, let's geek out about different things. We don't need to spend all the time on the straps unless you want to add on to that.
Well, I think, well, one of the reasons examples is because it's something that we can build the concept from. It's a very specific example. So talking generalities is nice, but like, this is why I love numbers, until you put two side by side doing the same thing, sometimes it's hard to grasp how it really applies. So the application is really important. I think what you're talking about, educating the client, is obviously a great thing. I don't think most Pilates teachers are prepared to teach the client a lot of the equipment adjustments and how they affect the load on the body. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Is because it's not because they don't care, it's not because they don't intuit things, it's because we don't collectively have
never.
We don't collectively have a language and a framework and an understanding that we can all share. to then teach and understand. And when people are individually trying to figure things out and notice them, that's hard. So, one, I think the education for the teachers needs to be there so they can in turn educate their students. And people like you have figured it out, have taken courses with other people, have done your own research. Like, that's a lot of time and energy, but you're a rare breed. And there are only so many teachers who have had that lengthy career to come up with those sorts of things on their own, which I think is hard.
Yeah.
So I want to create that language around there. And two, it depends on what the client wants. I mean, some clients are like, I want to learn about my body. I love this stuff.
Some don't care.
And some people are like, I just want to work hard. I don't care. Don't make me think. And so you can explain until your face is blue and they'll be like, no, just tell me what to do. So, it's obviously the more the quote unquote better, but in the end, like, why is that person coming to you? What do they want their experience to be? And maybe you're like, this is my experience, and if you don't like it, this isn't for you. That's one way to approach it. Or you can be like, this person, I can teach this person, and I can just do for this person. Acknowledge that they want two different things. I feel like I'm couching almost everything I'm saying in there's nuance, there's multiple ways, et cetera, which is not helpful in many situations. But I do think the best things in life are nuanced.
Well, I think it's important to talk. Like, this is what I love. This is actually why I love doing the podcast, because it's just so nice to hear different perspectives, because it might open doors to things that you weren't thinking of before.
Yeah.
And that's when I could, and then especially when I was younger and I was starting my teacher training journey, I realized I was the absolute novice in the room, and everyone knew so much more than me, and I wanted to make sure I can at least stand with them and not look like an absolute idiot or put somebody at harm. So surrounding yourself with so many different people, even if you don't I think it's just good to constantly have a wide vantage point and then keep exploring different concepts, because even if something doesn't relate to you or resonate with you in the time, you might come across somebody that you're like, that's what that person, because it's, again, every single client is going to present you with a different experience, with a different approach, and it changes by the day. It also changes by what's going on in our life. I love teaching, say, even just with, this is getting a little bit more nervous system, but noticing people's energy and overstimulated nervous systems for what's going on in the world and all the stress, they're performing differently. How they're moving is different, what their capacity is, they're getting fatigued faster, and then being able to adapt and knowing how to move through that, how to recognize that makes a difference. And then also, like, to your point, where does load and where does the springs and where does the progressions support the client going through all these different variables of things rather than fight against them.
Yeah.
And that's like your point, is like understanding the physics and how does the body respond to load, and also getting a little bit more in depth with that, like you brought up earlier. Is the nervous system ready for the load? And are they going to know? Like, that's the whole thing. You can't just always kick out from the gates.
I think that's, technology is great, but I think that's one of the most unique, not going away anytime soon things about Pilates teachers, is that ability to recognize and empathize and sense what's happening with the client that day. I mean, I think you immediately made me think of one of my clients who came in last week, and I noticed she didn't have any trouble following, and not the normal right left confusion, like whatever. And she goes, I didn't say anything. And after class, she goes, I felt like my brain was really working today. And you know what? I think it's because I didn't go to work today. Sure enough, the next week she showed up and she had gone to work and she couldn't, the choreography that we were just doing the last week. And so to empower teachers to not just have the cues to change with the client that day, but to also know what will happen. Could it be helpful if I changed her spring, or if I changed her foot bar, or if I changed her ropes, to change this experience to maybe get it closer to what I'm hoping and she's hoping to achieve today, because she's at a different place than she was last week or her neighbor is. And that's what I think, that load is a key part of the feedback loop. And we as instructors, I think, are really good at the cues or the exercise variations, but talking about the load is not as common.
Yeah. So let's dive into that a little bit more. Where are some missed opportunities of introducing new teachers to the understanding of spring tension, in your opinion?
Footwork.
Footwork.
Almost every class has footwork in it. Almost every teacher gives one spring setting, and almost every class has people that vary in height by at least 10 inches. And when you're on heavy springs, 10 inches can mean 25 pounds difference. And 25
You,
pounds difference could be fine if that's your intent. If your intent is you don't really care about load as much as some other things you're cueing. But, that's why some people come out of class and go, my quads were burning. And some people come out of class and go, oh, I must be so strong because I didn't feel my quads at all. Maybe it's because your springs weren't stretching as far. And footwork is just like the basic example of that.
so for newer teachers listening, I don't know what they teach at what the designated springs are. It's like what, 2 reds and a blue, or 3 reds, whatever.
I hear all sorts of things.
Okay, yeah. So from your experience and from your understanding of physics, the equipment, and all of your experience with that, what would you recommend a new teacher have clients start with who are, let's say, 5'6" and shorter, 5'7" to like 5'10"? Just like kind of gauge, where would your initial springs be for people to explore and understand those concepts for themselves?
I'll tell you how I approach it in my group classes with footwork, and that I'm constantly experimenting with different ways to communicate without overwhelming. So the first thing I do, the first place to start is to communicate at least 2 options of springs. I don't even bring height into it. I say we're doing footwork. It's going to be double leg or it's going to be single leg. You can pick. Here's your heavier springs for more work. Here's lighter springs for less load. That's the first thing I do. People choose. I believe generally in giving people autonomy and empowering them to make a choice for where they are that day. A lot of times they pick, it exactly happens. They pick the heavier weight. They're not ready for the heavier weight. Well, I reserve the right to come in and talk to you and change it or give different cues. Fine. The second thing, which I've been experimenting with, is explaining or just giving shorter people more spring, or super tall people less spring. And usually it's after I've worked with that person, or I noticed a very obvious deviation, like deviation from the middle of the height range. And the reason I do that is because part of what I'm looking at in my teaching is I'm looking for signs of stress from my students. And I kind of want them to all be experiencing a relative level of challenge, because I don't say we're going to do 10 reps. I say go, cue, notice what's happening, and then start counting down based on what I see or what I want to do next or whatever. So I want to see some struggle at some point in what I'm teaching. So if I'm not noticing that, or if I know already someone is very short or very tall, I will say, I want you to try this because this. And part of the environment I try and create from day 1, minute 1, with all of my students, whether I'm giving options or not, is the welcoming of questions and the welcoming of sharing experience. Don't be shy. So many people are so shy. They don't say anything when they're like, I'm not feeling anything. They don't want to admit that. And conversely, if their spring is too heavy and they can't straighten their legs all the way all the time, they're not saying anything because they don't want to look like they need to adjust their spine lower. So part of this conversation is, yes, giving options. It's fewer options. It's less explaining than I would if I was teaching a teacher, but it's introducing the environment of back and forth and of acknowledging that different people have different experiences, not because they're stronger or weaker because everybody's competitive, but because the springs get heavier as they stretch. So your load will be different. And what I've noticed is that by fostering that environment, people are more likely to speak up. And I'll have a back, like, what did you notice? And sometimes I'll do exercises on two different spring settings on purpose. First, let's do this. Then let's do this. What did you notice? And half the room will say, well, it got easier. And half the room will say, well, it got harder. And so there's 5 seconds where I can say, well, this might be why. Interesting. And that fosters that environment of the next time we do an exercise, someone will speak up and say, am I feeling this in the right place? What do you want me to feel? What is the point of this? And so a lot of this environment to me is less about giving information one way, but setting the stage for back and forth and acknowledgement that not everything is going to be experienced the same. I'm not always going to explain exactly what it is, but if you're unsure, let's talk about it. And I think that's one of the most valuable things for me, especially, I mean, as I said, we both said, I think in this conversation, like we're evolving how we teach, we're experimenting, we're seeing where do things land, where don't things land, right? And it comes back to what's my intent, what's the load, what is the client telling me verbally and visually? And then can I adapt the intent or the load to get the experience, the feedback that I want to be hearing?
Too, like what you're mentioning as well. And I teach very similar. I usually go like if you're feeling mild, spicy, or I have jokes with people about that kind of stuff all the time. But I think that's the dance of also just trying to give people enough information to like feel it, but also give enough space where they can explore it in their body and not put too much information on them where it interrupts the channels of them trying to discover what they're experiencing in the exercises.
Yeah. And I'll be clear, like this is a 5-person reformer class. Do I do this with my 30-person mat class?
Well, yeah.
No, it's very different. It's very different, right?
Yeah.
It's very much a more one-way communication thing. So the context matters too. But which I just want to mention that for everybody listening.
Yeah. Well, it always does.
Yeah.
That's one thing I do get, myself included. I'm trying to constantly audit myself. Like when I need to speak more clearly and understand words all have consequences. But where I get frustrated with, especially the Pilates social media landscape, is people treat things like it's just so black and white, or they're so vague, and people take that as a context of like, that's it. That's like the truth. That's the fact. And there's this whole myriad of different variables. And it's like, it all comes back down to like, well, it depends.
Yeah.
Who's the person? What's the situation?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that happens everywhere in all industries, in the fitness industry. It's much easier to memorize spring settings. It's much easier to go, always keep your head rest down for this exercise. It's much easier to have black and white rules because then you can just switch and go.
It started.
And to an extent, that's how that's how you start teaching. You have a framework. And I had a really interesting conversation, with some people in my DM. I just love the conversations I have in DMs. And well, how can we pack all of this information into teacher training? And that's a good point. Can we set the stage for them to know this is where you start, and as you continue, leave space to fill in the blanks here. This is a framework. This is a guideline. Leave space to keep learning about this.
I think from what I've seen a couple teacher training programs do chapters. Like my teacher, they a lot of the teacher training programs I see, like they do it by like reformer, mat, yada yada yada. But then there's also like with personal training, which is a little bit more. Let me go. I think I've seen STOT do this where you have your level 1 STOT, level 2 STOT, and you're learning about special populations, or you're doing these different things. It's kind of like curious, like you understand like the brain can only take in so much. You still want to give people the opportunity to get started because they need to be able to make their return on investment in order to make this a real thing. So it's almost like you kind of wonder like where is that teacher going to go teach? Where do they want to teach? Who is their ideal audience? Because some people don't want to teach classes and some people don't want to teach privates. Starting there but like have like a baseline of like, this is the introduction to the Pilates world. This is the basics of what you need to know, the history, the foundations of it, what the equipment is, what the equipment can do, and then learning how to articulate. But so maybe does that mean just we add in more chapters for somebody to be able to continue their education? But it's also the desire is how many teachers really have the desire to keep diving into the education component, and how many, with this new wave of influx of the trend of what Pilates is, some people just want to say, like, just go in and teach. And they haven't learned yet because they also haven't lived that long in life or had experiences of sometimes injuries set you back so much. And I feel like it's the teachers that had setbacks that understand the consequences of why it's important to keep learning, because it's our responsibility to our client. There's just so many variables on the equipment, and we got to know how to use what we're working with to keep people safe and to actually give them the transformation that they're looking for. That was a long-winded thing.
No. I think you're absolutely right. I think there are other industries that maybe we could think about. I don't know how the Pilates governance and all that regulation, all this stuff is like, I'm not a great person to talk about that, but
I love how diplomatic you are.
there are there are industries that set themselves up in a way where it's like, here's your baseline. Now, do you want to do a residency? Now, do you want to do a fellowship? And as you unlock these other trainings, you are qualified to do other things. Now, typically you see that in like rural industries, whereas a lot of times here it's just the client going, "Oh, that sounds great. I like this person. I don't know how to judge their qualifications, so sure they do rehab Pilates or whatever." But I think that's an interesting, to your point, any industry that has to do with the human body has to have those continuing education levels and has to be research literate, because the human body is something that we know a lot about, but we don't know more about. And we're constantly learning and evolving. And it's very different for something like mechanical engineering or material science, where, and obviously I'm not one of those super deep experts on those topics, but I am a mechanical engineer. The rules of basic physics have not changed, and they are there. They are pretty static. And things that are changing in those worlds are very, very, very niche. But I think in the human body, there's a set of rules that we need to be literate about. And then we constantly learn more. Like, we've learned so much more about the body in the last 4 years that it's
And
crazy.
we'll continue to. Yeah. It is an endless rabbit hole that you can dive into, and there's constant places to explore in. Say if you were to structure a teacher training program and you were just introducing new teachers to the idea of physics and the equipment, what do you think would be your prime pillars to get people started, to start thinking about going into working with the equipment?
3 things, I think. First thing is, springs get heavier the more they get stretched. So you can't assign a weight. And a lot of people come to me and they're like, well, that's just common sense. How do people not know that? A lot of people don't know that. A lot of Pilates teachers don't know that. Springs are not a constant weight. The more they stretch, they get heavier. So that's 1. 2, the spring settings you are given in training are starting points. They're starting points. And you know that when you're first starting teaching, you just give one setting. That's fine. But you have to know that at some point to be able to teach with more nuance. But it's okay to start with one thing, as you're still moving people. Like, at the end of the day, we're still getting people to move their bodies. Fantastic. It's great. And the third thing is spring behavior. Classifying spring behavior. I think this is really important when you start to get into the nuance of how do I give more options for this exercise. Sometimes the springs support your movement. Sometimes the springs resist your movement. And sometimes it doesn't matter. The springs are just there in the primary learning moment, or effort or load is coming from somewhere else, not the springs. When you have an exercise has supportive spring behavior, the way you make it harder is by taking away support, taking away spring. And when you have exercises with resistive spring behavior, the way you make the load heavier is by adding springs. And that little switch, like that's not a whole bunch of theory or module, carrying that choreography you learn sets the stage for learning to adapt on different equipment and different clients in the future. Sets the stage for critical thinking, figuring things out, rather than going, well, someone told me this, they're the expert, I'm just going to do what they said. Those are the three things that I think are simple changes that every Pilates teacher training program could do now to make a big difference. And I will acknowledge that many programs already do that.
Mm-hmm. Would you go as far as talk about the different relationships between how do you adapt exercises based on pulley height and what do people look out for? Yeah, that's for later.
Yeah, I think pulley height is one of the lesser impact. I think it's a finesse after you've got the 80% right. That's part of the final 20% cherry on top, because the difference in load, right? We're talking angle of pull, the difference in horizontal component of the force and vertical component of the force is relatively small if the rope is up or down. It's relatively small. The math is just relatively small. It does matter, but it's not the first thing that I would think. More basic things like foot bar, gear bar, and strap, to your point.
Is there anything you want to end this conversation with at all? Or like anything you want to have like a final statement?
I think the most powerful thing Pilates teachers can carry within themselves is curiosity. And that curiosity will help you learning, it will help you connect and help more people. And curiosity is ultimately what drove my interest into Pilates physics. Not everybody needs to go as deep into Pilates physics as I do or want to, but I think as soon as we stop being curious, the progress stops. And that's what I want. Like, I love this conversation we had because it's so interesting because it's all rooted in curiosity.
Yeah. Kaleen, thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving your time to have this discussion. I hope we can have another conversation in the future. You'd want to come back on the podcast again because I just loved talking with you today.
It was so fun, and I look forward to meeting you in person someday and being like, let's dive into the straps.
I know. People are going to be like,
Zoom, right? It's like, Sony, put me on a performer.
I know. Some people are just going to be like, Miss Sony, just let the strap. I swear, it's not just. Well, yeah, it's just. I feel like it's. Yeah.
Sorry.
But it's like that's like the fun thing that I love about Pilates as well. To your point, is like the more you explore and dive in, and you start to adapt, so many more things unfold, and it feels you can just. I know Pilates has changed my life so much in how I move, and once you kind of set in it, like it's changed how I weightlift, it's how I even like if I mess something up, how I recover, how all of these different things. Yeah, I want people, like you said, to have autonomy over themselves, but also not feel like they have to be codependent on their teachers, that we're giving them something that they can take with them for a lifetime, you know?
Absolutely.
So, Kaleen, thank you so much.